Welcome to Legal Meets, a look at legal beyond the law, a podcast by LegalMeets. On this episode of Legal Meets, we meet Kimberley Motley, an American attorney fighting for justice around the world, and best known as the first foreigner to litigate in Afghanistan's courts. Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Legal Meets. I'm joined by Kimberley Motley on the other side in North Carolina. How are you going, Kim?
Fine, how you doing?
I'm very well, thanks for joining us. It's been a long time coming. You're a globe-trotter and a very busy woman, so thank you for finally sitting still and giving us a chance to chat.
No problem, thanks for having me.
And so, we normally start the show by asking our guests, if they've ever got asked by TED to give a talk, what they would talk about, just to get a glimpse behind, their passion and interests away from the legal world. But, we've had a previous guest, our first ever guest, Andrew Ruder, was already asked to give a TED talk since being on the show in San Francisco, and hopefully there'll be many more. But you've already given one, so let us know what you actually spoke about and what you shared with the crowd.
Well, what I talked about is my theory of practicing law, which is, I call it that I fight for justice. And so what justice means to me is using the laws for the purposes of protection, because that's really the purpose of laws. So in my TED Talk, I discuss sort of the intersection of my work and sort of being sort of this legal archaeologist that sort of uncovers laws that are barely used in different jurisdictions for the benefits of my client.
All right, awesome. And so, you've been a lawyer now for, I think, almost, is it 15 years or 13 years?
Yeah.
And so you had, I think your parents had different plans for you. They wanted you to go to med school, but you ended up becoming a lawyer. So how did that kind of happen?
Well, to be honest, when I went to college, I wanted to be a DJ, and I still and so now I feel like I DJ laws. Like that's my purpose. I mix laws, go to court, and give them something to dance to. That's what I do. Okay. And so,
but you keep everyone, the judges especially, on their feet. So
keep them on their feet, exactly. Because it's like you never know. Some courts you go into, and their genre is hip hop. Some courts you go in, their genre is rock. It's about you understanding what playlist you're gonna play when you go to court as a litigator. And so, for me, I've always seen litigation, the practice of law, as a real art form. To me, it's a craft, just like DJing is a craft. And so while I went to college for the purposes of being a DJ, it quickly changed into sort of focusing on law. But I sort of see commonalities between the two, if that makes sense.
No, 100%.
Yeah. And so, I don't know, law was just sort of something that always naturally grabbed me. I was always interested in it. I think I was kind of fighting it a little bit, which is why I was sort of trying to go in a different direction. But it's just one of those things that I guess was meant to be, which is why I decided to veer towards going into law.
Yeah, no, definitely it seems the vocation that would let you leverage your creativity a lot more. And at the end of the day, again, all the technology that we kind of cover on the show and we speak about and we build ourselves, there to kind of let the lawyer be creative and be an advocate. And I think that's where they bring the greatest value, right? So I think it's interesting that you view it that way. And speaking of playing to the audience, I remember reading one of your accounts of maybe one of your first cases in Afghanistan. It might have all been new. And I think you went back and went full Afghan. Again, it probably was a case of the first time round, you try to do what you knew, and the second time round, you were like, no, hang on, I've got to play to this audience. So tell us a little bit about that incident.
Yeah, well, I believe that was representing a British man named Bill Shaw, and he was charged with bribery. Illegally charged with bribery. He was actually eventually found not guilty. And so basically, we went to first court. The reason why he's charged with bribery is that back in 2009, there were certain police officers in Afghanistan that were taking different sort of resources from various security companies. And so Bill Shaw was in an armored car, and they took his armored car. He worked for G4S as well as the other armored car that was following him. And so Bill Shaw, his company, and the British Embassy tried to get the car out from being impounded. Eventually, they were able to get it out from being impounded by paying a fee that was in theory going towards the impound. The cars were released, and then months later, the government came back and said that he paid a bribe, despite the fact that it was completely documented, despite the fact that he repeatedly asked for a receipt and everything. So when I went to first court, because there's first court, appellate court, and Supreme Court. So first court, he was charged with bribery. He was looking at a maximum of 8 years in prison.
Wow.
So I went to court, had all my little pretty exhibits, as us lawyers do. Had my little elements on each exhibit in English and Dari, and ultimately he was found guilty and given a 2-year sentence. And it was interesting because when the verdict came down, the judge, I said, this is ridiculous. You didn't have any evidence to prove this case. And so the judge's response to me was, we gave him the minimum. And I said, no, the minimum is a not guilty. So this was a court that did not know how to find anyone not guilty. You just were guilty no matter when you. So to them, we won the case.
That was a good outcome, right? Because he didn't go like the whole.
Exactly. And I'm like, the minimum is not guilty. Yes. So anyway, I had to reevaluate things myself, and he decided to appeal, which I'm glad he did. So we took to second court. Now, essentially, second court is a second trial, even though it's an appellate court. And so in second court, I did away with all my little exhibits and everything and really took it Afghan style, as I should have done my first court, which is just really just yelling in court, arguing, not letting people speak, just acting a fool. And so
you played their game, right?
Play their game, exactly. I had to play, it was hip hop that day.
Yeah.
So,
it was the ghetto hip hop.
It was hood hip hop. So I put on my little playlist and they felt me, and he was found not guilty.
Wow, what an awesome outcome. No, and that's again, like you said, you felt there was a need to change the tune, and then the outcome was good. That's an awesome outcome. And so in the first place, how does a former beauty queen, a mother of 3, a happily married wife end up in Afghanistan, a war-torn kind of, chaotic country? How did that happen?
Well, I originally went there in 2008, and I went there as part of a U.S. Department of State Justice funded program to train and mentor Afghan defense attorneys. And so prior to my going there, I'd been working in the Wisconsin Public Defender's Office for a little over 5 years. And I had a mounting student loans and whatnot. So really it was a financial decision for me to go there as an opportunity, like you said, as a mother of 3, as, a former law student lawyer, to make more than triple my salary. Yeah, wow. And so, it just was sort of one of those decisions that we made as a family, that I would go there for a year and then come back to America. But it obviously didn't turn out that way.
It's interesting because, again, a lot of the time, especially on the show, I'm always interested to see what brought people to become a lawyer in the first place. And you unabashedly say, yep, I went for the money. And then, now you're, again, seen as an amazing justice fighter, where usually it's kind of the other way around. It's like, hey, I wanted to help people. And then obviously that's not why you became a lawyer, just for money. But in this instance, it's funny how it's flipped around, and this whole other world that you saw kind of really drew you in. And so that's a really fascinating story, because, again, we'll find out more about what you've been working on. But, you've ended up in Afghanistan. I think you've possibly seeing things that you can't unsee, a lot of the injustice, and, from what I read, you were basically witnessing these horrific kind of sites in these prisons, mistreated both Afghani and also Westerners. And again, the corruption, the lack of, as you just described in your first, instance in the courts, the chaos. And obviously you're the first a woman representing people in the court there, and especially a foreigner. So what was it that when you got there that really made you say, you know what, I've got unfinished work here? Was it kind of like, again, pulling on a bit of string where you just, every corner you looked at and you were like, wow, it's getting worse? And I know, I imagine that would be quite overwhelming, but what was it that you said, I've got to be here and do this work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm the first foreigner to litigate in Afghanistan courts. There are other Afghan women that litigate, to be honest, but I'm the first foreigner, man or woman.
They need to, does a woman need a female representative in Afghanistan?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked me that, because a lot of people don't realize is when I came there in 2008, it sort of changed a little bit now, but you had a lot of people that were locked up that did not know what a defense attorney was.
Right.
And so what would happen is you'd have an Afghan female lawyer, if they wouldn't represent an Afghan male, or a man would not represent a woman, because sometimes they would be accused of adultery, and adultery is a criminal offense in Afghanistan, which is crazy. And so non-sexual adultery. And so you would have women would only represent other women or children, and men would only represent men. And so that sort of also set me apart, because I would represent men and women. And I was sort of looked at as different, and I had the ability to do that, which I think was a real benefit for me to really get a good understanding of the legal system. But what really got me started there is in my first year, I was there to train Afghan defense attorneys. I really didn't know anything about the legal system. And so I thought, in order for me to be a better trainer, I need to learn this system at a bare minimum, since I'm this so-called expert.
Yeah.
And so one thing I decided to do is I decided to go visit the prisons and talk to the inmates. So I went around the country and I just started talking to prisoners, talked to hundreds and hundreds of people locked up, men, women, and children, to listen to their experiences within the legal system. And I was hearing very similar stories. And in this journey, I met a lot of foreigners, English-speaking foreigners from, the US, UK, Australia, who were locked up, who were not being represented. And unfortunately, all their embassies weren't really doing anything for them, weren't really checking up on them, which is what, frankly, was required of embassies to do. And so I saw sort of this niche group of people that I could probably represent. And also I was a litigator before I came to Afghanistan. So I was a court attorney. So it's a combination of me missing court. It's a combination of me seeing the need of foreigners that were locked up throughout the country. And also I looked up the laws in Afghanistan, and the laws of Afghanistan allowed for me as a foreign lawyer to represent other foreigners locked up. So I dug up this law that existed that no one had ever used. And that gave me the legal ability to start representing people. And so after 1 year as working as a sort of a trainer for defense attorneys, I quit that job. In 2009, I became independent and started independently representing people, starting with representing foreigners like Bill Shaw.
Yeah, it sounds like you. It sounds like you uncovered. You've walked into this kind of dark room, and then you've uncovered again that you, in a position as a female litigator, can defend men and women. You can actually, again, uncover certain laws that are just maybe because of the cultural stigmas are getting overlooked, and kind of you've got these helpless prisoners not even probably considering that there is a legal system behind them that can actually back them up. So, a lot of the probably early work you did was just shining the light on a lot of these things and saying, hey guys, there is this legal system here that actually is a legal system that should be, I'm sure it's been abused and the bribes are rife, but again, it's great that you've kind of been able to actually dig this up, right? And I think that instantly probably helped a lot of other people indirectly. So,
yeah, I hope so. I think so. I mean, I love my job. So
that's great. That's great to hear. And so initially, again, as you mentioned, you went over there as the State Department's project and helping all these lawyers. But a lot of the work that has garnered a lot of the attention in the media has been around the young children getting caught in arranged marriages, young and old. And there's certain cases that have hit the headlines around the world. There's the one about the 6-year-old Nagma that again, made headlines across the world. Tell us a little bit about that case, because that's, quite confronting, I would say.
Yeah. Well, can I just backtrack a little bit, just tell you
Sure.
about my practice in general?
Yeah,
and then I sort of go into NACMA. But basically, the way my practice works is it's a for-profit practice in which I represent a lot of international companies, international NGOs, individuals, for mostly criminal, commercial, some civil work. And so those are the paid clients. And about a third of my work is human rights pro bono cases. And so with those clients, I consider myself to be a global investor in human rights. So I don't take government money, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I try to work very independently, because I try to encourage other people to also be global investors in human rights, especially lawyers. And I also think that as lawyers, we shouldn't be ashamed of, frankly, making money. We all have bills to pay, but also we have an obligation, ethical obligation to also do good work too. And so that's where the pro bono comes in. So clients like Natma, the 6-year-old girl, her story is that her father owed a $2,500 debt to a neighbor. And so the neighbor, because the father has 8 kids, he lost his job and and his wife was sick, he needed money to survive. So anyway, the neighbor became impatient. And so he kept sort of asking the father for the money, but he didn't have it. So the 2 men agreed to have a jirga. And what a jirga is it's part of Afghanistan's informal justice system. It's essentially mediation. And at this mediation meeting, who you have there is you have the 2 aggrieved parties, the father, the neighbor. You have village elders, religious leaders, and they sit together and they try to figure out how to solve this problem. And obviously the problem was, how is this money that is going to be paid back to the neighbor? So essentially, everyone at the jirga, except the father, agreed that the best way to satisfy the debt is if the father gave his 6-year-old daughter to the neighbor's 21 or 19-year-old son to marry. And that's how the debt was supposed to be satisfied. And that's what was the decision. Yeah. So that's, what happened. And so many people...
Sorry, just so everyone knows that's very common, right? It's not that yeah, unfortunately it's very common. Yeah,
it's very common, and it's illegal. It's illegal according to Islamic law. It's illegal according to Afghan law. According to Islamic law, the Holy Quran says that a woman is not to be forced to be married. A woman, not a child. And Afghan law says that you're supposed to be at least 16 years of age when you marry somebody. But it is a choice. But it happens all the time. There's over 300 million child brides on the earth, which is crazy. And so most of them are forcibly put in that position, the vast majority. So anyway, many people reached out and they wanted to figure out how to satisfy this debt. How can they solve this problem? So they reached out to me and said, well, I have money. Can you pay to get this girl back? And I said, it's not how it works. What needs to happen is there needs to be a second jirga, a second mediation that all the parties need to agree to that they want to be a part of. And in order to solve the problem. And if I'm going to be a part of it, all these parties, the father, the neighbor, the elders, the religious leaders, if I'm going to be part of it, they all need to agree also that I'm in charge of this jirga. So long story short, I was able to convince them. We sat down, we had a second jirga, and the second jirga, we terminated the engagement. The debt was satisfied. We put things in contract, and in the contract, I added, frankly, extra things that are legal. I said that all the guys agree that none of them have the right to marry off any of their daughters, and it's completely illegal to do that according to Afghan law and Islamic law. All the parties agree that all their daughters have the right to education, and they all understand and agree that if they break any of these issues or any of these, frankly, contractual duties and legal duties, that they will be arrested. And so we signed it, got all their contact details, and the debt was satisfied, and the girl was brought back home, and she still is at home with her father. I just saw her a couple months ago.
I was going to say, you check up to make sure, I guess, justice, the unjust are kind of still served.
Yeah, I do. Her father's really good at, actually, she's kind of mad at me right now because last time I was in country, her father called me up. She was having throat problems. She had to get her tonsils out. So I hooked it up to get her tonsils out at the hospital. So she was really mad at me. But yeah,
so she's like, you can't win them all. But again, I think it's such an amazing story. But that's another case of, with access to justice, it's not just so much, again, getting access. It's knowing your rights, or even if you have any rights. And it's funny that you point out that it's illegal to actually, to do what her father was doing, but actually they probably don't even know that, right? And it's probably falls into the more concern about cultural restraints and, the kind of what their family and people around them think, as opposed to what, a criminal lawyer or a judicial system would think. So again, it's so good that you're shining a light. And again, I think indirectly, you might be fighting a case at a time, but it seems like this kind of, the seismic kind of shift, and everyone's feeling your wrath over there. It's good. It's amazing to hear. And then, so
and just like these cultural restraints, they're not confined to Afghanistan. I mean, we see like in the U.S., where in the 60s they were hosing Black people down for exercising their freedom of speech.
It wasn't that long ago.
Said you have freedom of speech, but because culture was allowing this crap to happen, it's up to us as lawyers and people to point out the law and say, no, I understand culture, you've been doing that, but that's illegal and there's consequences.
Yeah, I think even, again, it's happening today, in almost every country, whether it's a really developed country. And, you've got things like freedom of speech really quite contentious right now with, the NFL and what's happening with, Trump and, people getting kicked out of like schools and whatever else for, taking a stand or actually exercising their freedom of speech. So it's, I guess the lawyer's job's never finished, but again,
we have a president that's criticizing NFL players in their job for exercising their freedom of speech every single day. On his job, he's violating the Constitution, whether it's, frankly, trying to kick out Muslims, whether it's trying to hinder women's progress. That's what he's doing on his job, but that's different. It's like we're so hypocritical as a society.
Apparently, if you use Twitter, it's okay. So you can exercise as much nonsense as you want if it's on Twitter. Right. So again, this was like just one example, and it was just one case. And then more recently, again, just a few days ago, I read in the New York Times the case of Mina, which I have to admit, again, was even seeing a photo with the battle axe kind of scars on her head, from her uncle and brother, I believe. Again, just you can't help but stop in your tracks and you get a big lump in your throat, and your eyes well up just hearing these stories. And it's not, again, this one story of Mina is not just her. She's in a shelter with these other kids that you're now defending as well. So tell us a bit about that case, because again, that's one that's in the headlines right now, and it seems like your work's never done. So what's happening with that case right now?
Okay. Well, just background, Mina was born in Pakistan. And when she was 6, she was forced to marry a 60-year-old man. Now, he was horrible, of course. And so he repeatedly beat her. He, would lock her up. When she was 16, he basically took her on the roof of their house and pushed her off the roof. And she thought maybe she broke her legs or arms. She doesn't know because he didn't get her any medical care. So anyway, there was a neighbor who saw this happening and offered to help her because he was afraid that, frankly, he would kill her. And that's, frankly, the path that he was going down. Yeah. And so the 2 teenagers fled from Pakistan, mostly on foot, and made it to Afghanistan. And basically, the teenager was a 16 or 17-year-old boy, and they went to his relative's house in Afghanistan. And basically, all she wanted was for the abuse to stop. So the boy was trying to mediate, thought, let's put her in a safe place and let's try to mediate this stopping. So anyway, they connected with her husband, who agreed to meet with them. And so her husband, her brother, and her uncle came down to meet with them in Afghanistan. And actually, Mina wanted her brother to be there because she thought her brother being there would be another layer of protection against her husband. So with her mother's blessing, The three men drugged the two teenagers. When Gulmina woke up, she saw the teenage boy next to her. His head was severed. He was dead. He had been cut up with an axe, and she had been hacked with an axe 15 times, including in her head, to the point where her brain was exposed. So it was her husband, her brother, and her uncle that were responsible for this.
Insane.
You know, thankfully she made it to the hospital, and the Afghan doctors said they'd never seen anything like this, which I'm sure miraculously they saved her. And so my job, when I originally started representing Gulmina, because she was very terrified, as you can understand, and it was a horrendous case. I mean, you know this as a lawyer. When you represent a client, especially like this, my purpose was to get them arrested and get them prosecuted. In order for me to do this, it requires that I get the information from my client, which is a very hard and slow process to get from her what happened, what was her life like, you know, but these are things that I need to know. So because the men lived in Pakistan, I actually traveled to Pakistan and talked to the Pakistan government, certain police officers, and they said, yes, they'd be willing to extradite these men to Afghanistan, but it would be up to Afghanistan to allow for that to happen. Now, when I started taking Gulmina's case, this had been 3 years after the incident, and the Afghan government hadn't even talked to her once. That's how ridiculous they were.
Wow.
And so I went and I talked to the Afghan government. I said, you guys need to be prosecuted. This is a national security issue. Meanwhile, I was also working on trying to get Gulmina's case to be a priority case with the UN. Now, because of this refugee crisis, UNHCR's mandate has over, I believe, 8 million refugees that they are mandated to deal with. So in order for her case to be even remotely paid attention to, it required making her case a priority, which is a very special category that's very difficult to get. And if it's priority case, then it's up to trying to find a country that's willing to take her. Where luckily we were able to convince them to make her case a priority case based on her extensive risk to her safety. And Sweden graciously offered to take Gulmina, and so now she's in Sweden. I took her there about a month ago.
Oh, that's amazing. I actually, again, it was a very heartwarming story. I just saw the video that was displayed on the New York Times article, and it's just insane. Like, again, she's stepping foot into this country where she not only, lived this really, again, sheltered life in Pakistan, and then again a torturous, journey into Afghanistan, but now you can just see. And again, I think Sweden as a government's been really, forthcoming and gracious with the way they've dealt with immigration and immigrants and asylum seekers. But it's just amazing to see her get at her first bedroom, and and I know one of the quotes was around her, what she actually wanted was she wanted a TV to actually see. I think, was that right? At the end of her, she'd kind of fallen in love with this Indian soap TV show, and she just wanted to see what happened at the end of it. So she probably, it's like being in Netflix and you haven't seen the last episode of the season. But I think now she has her own bedroom, and you, again, Wonder Woman, you've gone and got her a TV apparently.
Yeah.
I hope she wasn't disappointed with the finish of the show.
I know, right? Exactly. But it was, it's, for me, it was such an amazing journey to see. My mother's an immigrant, from North Korea to America, but it was just amazing for me to travel with her from Afghanistan to Sweden and just realize everything was new. Like, she'd never been on an escalator, and I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it was cute. She was trying to get up the escalator and she hadn't seen one, right? So it's amazing.
Broke her neck, and I didn't realize it. You went to the grocery store and she was just amazed. Seeing that was new. Seeing men and women walking around openly holding hands was new. Being on a mountain, walking outside freely was
everything
new.
You take for granted, right?
Exactly, everything. So to me, that was a really amazing experience, and it gave me a really tiny sliver of what I believe refugees go to when they're going from one country to the next. Everything is new. And, Gomina is now in that class of refugees. And a lot of people think, oh, people are just going, people are running for their lives. People generally want to stay in their home country. Okay.
Yeah.
But everyone doesn't have that choice, unfortunately. So I wish the world was a lot kinder to refugees, especially those like Gomina that are literally running for their lives.
And that's the thing. Unfortunately, most of the countries that a lot of the refugees are seeking refuge in, we live a really amazing, especially in Australia. There's no borders. There's no bombs coming over the border. There's no real internal conflict, and you kind of live a kind of cushy, sheltered life. And it just seems when these things happen, it's like, oh, we don't want their problems to come here, right? And the governments obviously need to do certain things to ensure there's good vetting and I think a stable landing pad for asylum seekers, refugees to arrive and be able to flourish, right? And that means educational opportunities. And I think even Gomina wants to study. Is she trying to follow in your footsteps? Is that right? Or
Sarah Go wants to. She wants to be a doctor.
A doctor, okay.
All the doctors that helped her.
She would have seen all the her experience through hospitals. Okay, that makes sense. That's amazing. So I keep saying again, I keep referring to you as Wonder Woman because now again having a further insight into what you're doing. It's not even the lawyer, right? You just mentioned that you called up Nagma's father about her tonsils. It seems that you're almost becoming, again, a surrogate mother or guardian to a lot of these people that really don't have much in the way of family, finance, or freedom. So kudos, because that's, again, it's quite amazing what you're doing. And this was all, documented in a documentary that was released in 2015. And again, a lot of what you see in that, it's like chaos. You're running around in this country. So what's it like actually? You're spending 9 months of the year away from home. What's it actually like? Being on the ground in these countries. Like, do you feel unsafe? Do you feel at home now? What's again all these different judicial systems that you got to kind of familiarize yourself with. What does it feel like? Are you just like a gypsy and just running for shelter everywhere? What's it like?
I never realized or never thought I'd be doing this for over 9 years, and when I went to Afghanistan, didn't even have a passport. It was my first time leaving the country. So I had zero frame of reference in terms of international travel. Now it's just crazy, and I represent clients on every continent, basically, except for Antarctica, which I love.
You're working on that one, right? She's waiting for it.
Really want to Antarctica. I want to sign it. I need something notarized. I will be there.
You want to pick up that box, yeah.
Exactly. No, but it's just, I love people. And one thing that I love about my job is that the intersection of, I feel like I love cultural anthropology, the laws, and seeing that collision of the two worlds is very interesting to me. I love meeting everyday people and trying to solve everyday legal problems that people may have. And that to me is super interesting. So I find that, frankly, where I go, generally people are very, as curious as I am about them, they're as curious about me, which is interesting. And I don't know, I just love getting in there, working, fighting systems from the inside out. Sometimes it definitely does get scary. I mean, sometimes it's very, isolating. But I'm used to it, to be honest. I've made a lot of really great contacts, a lot of great friends throughout the world. I have a lot of clients that, they were clients, now they're friends, and we'll always stay in touch, kind of thing. So I don't know. I just really love my job and I really love my clients, and I just want to do I have so much more to do. I feel like I really even haven't really touched this.
You're just getting started. Well, there's a lot of, I guess, pressure on you. I mean, you've received, for the cases you've defended, you've received, I think the last count was 4 presidential pardons. Is that still accurate?
Yeah. 4, yeah.
Yeah, wow. Okay. And your record is obviously quite impeccable. Even the case that you mentioned initially with the British soldier and the armored vehicles, you actually, it didn't start off so well, but you actually got that, turned around. And so again, what's next? Like you say, you're just getting started, but there's all these people that are kind of, again, you're probably a bit of a target in terms of, the go-to now, which is probably good for business, but, you're in demand. So what is next?
Yeah, well, I just really want to really make a really impact on global legal representation around the world. I want to educate as many people on this planet in a substantive way as to what their rights are so that they can either fight for themselves or their lawyers can fight for them. And I know in my travels that the vast majority of people on this earth don't have access to a lawyer. So it's about educating people, everyday people, about what their rights are in a substantive way. I want to keep fighting for people with their cases, use those cases as blueprints and share them widely, which is what, the media has been very great in doing that with a lot of my cases, sharing sort of these blueprints on what can be done. I just want to really make a real impact. And I think that as a world, we need to understand that, representing a child bride in Afghanistan is not just an Afghan problem. That's a global problem. That's something we all need to deal with. Globalization is at a level it's never been. There was this theory back in the 80s of 6 degrees of separation. We're all separated by 6 degrees of people. Well, now that's 4.74 degrees of separation. And what that means is our huge global dysfunctional family is more connected now than we ever been. So we cannot say the problems in Syria are only Syrian problems. No, those are our problems too. And a lot of those problems can be dealt with in a legal way, or at least there's consequences that be given in a legal way. So I have a lot of big plans to really take the law to the next level. To me, the law is cool. And I want to make it even cooler than what it is. I want people to not be afraid of the law, but understand how to embrace the law and use it to their benefit, whether it's against the individual or against their government. So those are sort of some of my plans generally, and also, frankly, to keep fighting, keep doing these cases wherever they may be in the world. People are always sending me cases. I still want people to keep sending me cases because I'm always ready for a fight.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, you mentioned the stat, like we're one big global family now, and I think everyone's problems affects, somebody else, and there's growing socio-economic divide. I mean, even in Australia, again, a very developed, country, the income equality gap is monstrous. Like it's actually growing, I think, at the 4th fastest rate in the world. So take that, and then on top of that, the stat that gets thrown around about the internet, like just being connected is, over 4 billion people. Well, there's over 4 billion people, the world's, the majority of the world's population that actually live outside of the rule of law and access to justice. And I think you mentioned, like, it's around 300 million child bride kind of,
right.
Again. So you take those statistics and then again, look at, our first world problems in the UK, USA, Canada. 80% of people that have a legal issue actually can't get access to justice. So it's not a small problem. And again, it's like you're taking on the heavyweights in a sense, but everyday Joe is actually struggling with the same problems and affects everyone. So it's, as you said, one big global village, and we've all got to kind of do our share. And it's interesting that for lawyers, as you mentioned, you said you've got an obligation, but there's not many other, as much as lawyers cop flack, for high hourly rates and whatever else. There's not many actual professions that really take that upon themselves to actually, dedicate pro bono time. And you mentioned a third of your time, which is significant, right? I take, my hat off to you, and it's amazing to hear kind of what you're doing. And you're at home now. You only get 3 months at home, and it's almost dinner time in North Carolina. So I got to let you get back to either cooking or eating. But I just want to, we'll do a quick. A couple quick fire questions just to finish off, and then we'll let you get on your way. But you're traveling around. You're in a lot of airports. You're living, on your laptop, this mobile office. So, is there a phone that's are you Android? Are you iOS? Are you Windows? What are you using?
I use iOS.
Yeah, you're on Apple. Okay, cool. Yeah. And so, apart from your phone, what's the I think I know the answer to this, but what's the bit of technology that you can't live without?
My laptop.
Yeah, that's it's your whole life, right? Okay.
Exactly.
All right, and then is there any other ritual or something that keeps you sane? I know in the documentary there's an awesome scene where you kind of basically, it's almost like again, a heavyweight boxer going into a fight and putting on you're just like, everyone shut up, I'm putting on my tunes. And there's a cool song that comes on. But yeah, so is there one ritual that kind of, again, through all this chaos that keeps you sane and kind of keeps you feeling you? Is there one thing you do?
It's my music. It's my music.
The DJ.
I love music. I love, like, I do little DJing on the side when I can't, like, not like,
There's Afghani parties are going off, aren't they?
It's my music.
Yeah, awesome. All right, great stuff. And so, like living over in Afghanistan, is there kind of like good coffee and things? Have you kind of like, have you got that at least in the mornings? Are you drinking tea? I know they make really amazing tea.
No, I drink hot water and lemon every morning.
Okay, because you probably get taken to these meetings and it's like, if you're drinking tea, you're probably having tea like 30 cups a day or something.
Yeah, no, I always drink hot water and lemon. I'm kind of over the tea.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, cool.
Try to cleanse.
Yeah, that's it. All right, Kim, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for, again, making the time in your busy schedule and sharing these amazing stories with us. And thank you for actually, again, doing the amazing work that you're doing. So we want to keep in touch and stay abreast of your story and see, again, how the next episode of Wonder Woman's superhero, episodes pan out. So thanks again, and we'll speak to you soon.
Yes, thank you.
Have a good evening. Bye.